The next defense we need to go over is misrepresentation. And in short, a misrepresentation is simply an assertion of fact that is not true. And we have two major categories of misrepresentation we want to go over. We have fraudulent misrepresentation and non-fraudulent misrepresentation. Of course, a fraudulent misrepresentation is an intentional lie, right? It's when the party is making an assertion of fact that is not true, knowingly or recklessly, with the intent to induce the other party's assent. A non-fraudulent misrepresentation is when a person lies on accident, right? They believe that their assertion of fact that is not true to be 100% true, right? At the time they make the statement, they think they're telling the truth. But of course, it turns out that what they said was actually an assertion of fact that was not true, right? So we'll come back to non-fraudulent misrepresentation. Let's start with fraudulent misrepresentation. Here, we're going to have two types of misrepresentation that we want to think about, right? We have fraud in the factum, otherwise known as fraud in the execution, and we have fraud in the inducement. Fraud in the execution is really easy to see on a contract law fact pattern. This is usually going to be where a party is tricking another party into signing a contract, right? Usually this is done with some sort of innocuous document, right? Someone comes up to the other party, right? I come up to you with some sort of form or blank letterhead that is actually a carbon copy, but you don't know this. And under the carbon copy, I have hidden a contract with all kinds of terms you have no idea about. So I have you sign the top part of this form that you think is some innocuous document. Of course, underneath that, I have this hidden contract that the carbon copy bleeds through and you're actually signing unbeknownst to you, right? When you don't know what terms you're agreeing to, or the terms are somehow being hidden by one of the parties, right? That's fraud in the factum or fraud in the execution, and that is a 100% void contract. It's a nullity, it's not enforceable. The court's going to treat that type of contract as though it never existed. Now, more commonly on a contract law fact pattern, you're not going to see fraud in the execution. You're more likely to see fraud in the inducement, where a party is making a misrepresentation in order to induce the other party's assent, right? And so, unlike fraud in the factum, this is not void, this is a voidable contract. And we say that a contract is voidable by the adversely affected party if a fraudulent misrepresentation of fact induced the adversely affected party to manifest assent and the adversely affected party was justified in relying on the misrepresentation. So we have three elements for fraudulent misrepresentation, right? We have this idea that we need a fraudulent misrepresentation of fact, we need inducement, and we need justifiable reliance. So let's just break down all three of these elements and how it plays out, right? And if you understand these three elements, non-fraudulent misrepresentation is going to be very easy when we get there. Okay, so this first element, let's split this in half, right? We have two parts. We have this idea that we need a fraudulent misrepresentation and it has to be of fact. So what is a fraudulent misrepresentation? We know what a misrepresentation is. We already talked about this. A misrepresentation is an assertion of fact that is not true. So what makes it fraudulent, right? Well, we say that a misrepresentation is fraudulent if it is made either knowingly or recklessly without knowledge of its truth and with the intent to induce assent. So usually this is very easy to see, right? This knowing requirement and this intent requirement is typically how this plays out. A lot of times you're going to see fraudulent inducement in real estate contracts, right? This is where it pops up all the time. So let's say that we have a homeowner who's selling his house to a potential buyer. And so the homeowner is giving the tour to the buyer, the potential buyer, and the homeowner during this tour tells the buyer that the house is 100% free of termites and termite damage, when in fact, the home is infested with termites and the homeowner knows this, right? So the homeowner is making a pretty big misrepresentation. He's asserting the fact that the home is free of termites when he indeed knows that the house is completely infested with termites, right? Very easy analysis, right, for our first element. Well, is that a fraudulent misrepresentation? Well, yeah. Number one, it's knowing, right? He knows that the assertion of fact he's making is not true, right? He knows the house is infested with termites and he's telling the buyer that it's not infested with termites. That's a knowing misrepresentation. And why is he making this misrepresentation? Right? He wants to induce them to buy the house, right? He's acting with the intent to induce assent. That is classic fraudulent misrepresentation, right? No bones about it. That is the most garden variety classic fraudulent misrepresentation. Homeowner knows the house has some type of damage and then he says the house does not have that damage, right? That's knowing fraudulent inducement, okay? But what is this reckless requirement? How do we draw up a fact pattern where this idea of acting recklessly comes in? Well, let's say that the homeowner, stick with the homeowner situation. Let's say that a homeowner is trying to sell his house and he's never been in the basement of his house. For whatever reason, he's scared of the basement. He's never been in the basement, has no idea what's in the basement, okay? And let's say a buyer, a potential buyer, comes to the home to tour it. And the buyer asks the homeowner, the potential buyer asks the homeowner, is there any water damage in the basement? I know a lot of these houses, the basements can have water damage. Is there water damage? And let's say that the homeowner says, no, there is no water damage in the basement, right? And when in fact, the homeowner has no idea what's in the basement. He's never been in the basement, right? And of course, let's say that there actually is, unbeknownst to the homeowner, there is water damage in the basement. Well, is that a fraudulent misrepresentation? Well, it's not a knowing misrepresentation, right? He has no idea whether there's water damage in the basement or not. But is he acting recklessly without knowledge of the truth? Yes, right? He's acting with conscious ignorance. He's never been into the basement. He knows he's never been into the basement. He knows he has no idea whether there's water damage in the basement or not. Yet he's sitting here and saying affirmatively, there is no water damage in the basement, right? That's making a statement recklessly without knowledge of its truth. This goes back to that idea of conscious ignorance we talked about in our last video. He's consciously ignorant, willfully ignorant, right? He knows he doesn't know whether that statement is true or not. He's never been there, but he's making it anyway, right? So that will satisfy the reckless requirement. And why is he saying this? Why is he telling the potential buyer that there's no water damage? He's doing this because he's trying to induce them to buy the home, right? He's acting with the intent to induce their assent, right? So that's going to satisfy both of these. So we know that's a fraudulent misrepresentation, okay? Now, the one other thing we want to touch on is what is this idea of fact, right? Because we say, okay, we have to have a fraudulent misrepresentation. We know what that looks like. But what does it mean to be a fraudulent misrepresentation of fact? What we're generally saying there is it can't be a misrepresentation of opinion, right? You know, the homeowner says something like, I bet, you know, the potential buyer says, you know, what do you think my wife will think of these wall colors? And the homeowner says, you know, I don't know, I think your wife would probably like these colors. These are pleasing color palettes to me. I think your wife would enjoy these colors, right? Well, and then it turns out that the wife doesn't like the colors. That's not a misrepresentation of fact, right? That's an opinion, whether someone likes the wall colors or not, right? That's not going to be a fraudulent misrepresentation. Now, the one exception to this idea is if it's an expert opinion from an expert, right? An expert who is giving an expert opinion, right? And one of the big cases that illustrates this really well is Vokes v. Arthur Murray Incorporated. This is a really well-known contract law case. And to refresh everyone's memory, right, remember in this fact pattern we had the owner of a professional dance studio, right? And he has one of his dance students, and he tells this dance student that she is amazing, right? She has all kinds of potential. She has great prowess. She's going to be this amazing dancer. And as she continues to progress, he continuously tells her that she's progressing so much. She's making all of these improvements. And of course, these statements are inducing the student to continue to pay money for more dance lessons. And then by the end of it, she ends up paying over $30,000. And eventually she wants to get out of the contract by saying, look, this was a misrepresentation. I wasn't improving. I never actually improved my dance skills. They told me I had so much potential and I was this great dancer. And as it turns out, I'm a below average dancer. I'm not a very good dancer at all. They were misrepresenting my ability to dance, right? And so the question is, well, is that a misrepresentation of fact, right? And basically what the court is saying there is because we have an expert, a professional dance studio, giving expert opinion and expert advice, right, that happens to induce this person to manifest assent, right, then we're going to say that in that situation, even though it might not be a hard fact, right, whether someone's a good dancer or not a good dancer, because they're not telling the whole truth. Obviously, this dance studio knows that this isn't the next, great dancer. Sure, her potential is somewhat limited here, and they just keep on with the compliments, right? They're gonna say, okay, in that case, again, mainly because we have an expert giving, expert opinion or expert advice, we're gonna say that satisfies this first element. So, the one thing to look out for when we're thinking misrepresentation of fact is if it is an expert opinion from an expert that's inducing assent, right? In that case, we're thinking Vokes, this dance studio case, and we want to say that that's generally going to still constitute, satisfaction of this first element when we have something like that. So again, you just want to look for expert opinions from an expert that's inducing assent, right? In that case, we're going to relax this first requirement of fact a little bit and say that still flies, okay? So that's our first element though, this fraudulent misrepresentation of fact. Now, there's one other thing we want to note here, and that's what happens when someone's silent, right? We have a non-disclosure, where a party is silent, right? Do we have to have a verbalized misrepresentation in order to satisfy this first element? And the answer is not necessarily, right? A non-disclosure can satisfy this first element. Silence can satisfy this first element. Remember one of our first hypos we did here. Imagine that a homeowner who knows that his house is infested with termites is giving a tour to a potential buyer and doesn't say anything about the termites, right? An inspector comes, doesn't say anything about the termites, just remains silent on the issue of the termites, and no one discovers the termites, right? Well, of course, later the house gets sold. This new homeowner comes in and discovers all this termite damage. Can they get out of the contract on this idea of fraudulent misrepresentation? The answer there is going to be yes, right? A non-disclosure of a known fact is the equivalent of making the assertion that the fact does not exist, right? That's our general rule. So we say that you have a duty, right, to disclose certain types of information. And the easy rule, general rule to remember in your head, is if a party has information that they know would likely influence the other side's decision as to whether or not to enter the agreement, they have a duty to disclose that information. You can't have a house infested with termites and not say anything, right? That's not going to work. Also, if you're taking steps to conceal it, right? There's water damage and you're painting over the water damage to hide it. All that stuff, that's non-disclosure. That's garden variety fraud. That's not going to work. Thank you so much for watching this video preview of our Legal Education Accelerator Program, or LEAP for short. If you would like to see the conclusion of this video and gain full access to our entire 1L and 2L video library, integrated outlines, streamable audio versions, additional practice exams with explanations, and much more, we invite you to head over to our website and join the thousands of law students who have already enrolled. To get started with your no-risk free trial today, simply click the link in the description box below or visit www.studicata.com/leap.
Hi everyone, my name is Serena and I'm currently a law student at South Texas College of Law, Houston.
Hi everybody, my name is Shiva and I'm currently a law student at Southwestern.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle and I am a first-year student at South Texas College of Law, Houston. I used the Studicata study video series last semester to help me prepare mostly for contracts, and I actually made an A+ in contracts last semester, which I greatly dedicate to the Studicata videos.
By using Studicata to help me prepare for my final exam, I was able to score the highest grade out of my class on the final and even have my essay distributed as the model answer. Not to mention I had done quite poorly on the midterm and was struggling throughout the whole course of the semester, understanding the material and keeping up with lectures.
Because of the Studicata video lectures, I was able to go into my exams with a feeling of confidence. I didn't have to worry about what the rules of law were or how I was going to organize my answer to an essay question.
I would absolutely recommend the Studicata series and their online course materials to anyone. I think that they are not like professor lectures that you might find online or other outside study materials that you may encounter. I think that the Studicata videos really focus on not only ensuring that you understand the material that you're going to encounter on your final, but they also help you to understand kind of the best method for test taking, and they really break down how to approach each problem and the best ways to tackle certain methods on testing, and I think that's really important, and I think it's really special. I don't see that anywhere else in any of the other online resources that I've found. So I would certainly recommend Studicata to anyone who is studying in law school right now. Good luck on your studying and you're going to do great.
I would definitely recommend Studicata to anybody watching this video. Give it a chance. I'm sure, I'm positive that you will love it, that you will get a lot out of it, and that you will be happy that you gave it a chance. I definitely am. I know I will be using Studicata in the future.
And I cannot thank Studicata enough for getting me through my first semester of law school. I will definitely continue to watch the Studicata video lectures throughout my law school career, and I highly recommend that any future or current law student do the same.